I run a fix-it stall on the third row at Sundvel. Third row is where the old steel cargo containers were dragged out and welded together by the early traders, and where the rents are still cheap enough that a man with a tool roll and a 6-year-old daughter can keep his lights on. My stall is 2 containers wide. The front bench faces the row. The back bench is mine, with the salvage drawers below it, and the broken radios I can utilize parts and the spare oilcloth I keep over the work in progress so the grit does not settle on it overnight. Mira is 6. She has my wife's hair and my own bad sense of humor, and an ability to sit very still on the edge of the front bench for as long as a stranger is talking to me. She does her lessons in the corner, on a folding chair, with a slate balanced on her knees. And she does not interrupt unless I ask her to. When the stall is slow, she takes the small jobs, the bicycle bells, the wind-up clocks, and she does them properly. I have not had to redo any of her work. There was a man came in on a 6th day last summer who had a child's wind-up monkey with cymbals, the kind that drums on a tin drum between its knees. The spring had gone. He was a freighter pilot home on a 1-day pass, and he had 3 children at home, and the monkey was the youngest's. And the youngest would not sleep without the monkey going through its little 4-bar drum and cymbal routine at bedtime. Mira took the job at the front bench while I finished with the man's other repair. A hand lamp with a corroded contact. She stripped the back of the monkey down and found that the spring had not gone at all. The small lever that engages the spring had slipped its pin. She tapped the pin back in with the wooden mallet I keep for the work. The whole job took her 8 minutes. The pilot paid me for the lamp, and I told him the monkey was on the house, because Mira had not paid for her apprenticeship yet, and a free monkey was a fair entry into the trade. He looked at her where she was sitting and he said, "Soft. I have one of those at home." I told him I knew. He carried the monkey out in his coat pocket and, I do not know how the bedtime went, but he sent me a paper note a month later that said the boy had got to sleep. I keep the note pinned to the back of the bench, beside the stack of my wife's letters. My wife flies the long hauls. She is 6 months out and 3 months home. We have done it that way since Mira was born. Since the rates went up on the company line and the household needed the long-haul pay to stay above dust, she writes when she can. There is a stack of her letters in a drawer at the back of the stall, and Mira reads them at bedtime. That is how we keep her in the house when she is not in the house. I fix what people bring: hand warmers, lamp batteries, bicycle bells, wind-up clocks, pressure pots whose seals have gone hard, bay door motors and hoverbroom motors, the small mechanisms in children's toys, the clickback of a wooden duck that pecks at the floor, spring of a tin man that walks 3 steps and falls down. I do not turn anything away. The high-end shops on the inner row do not touch the small jobs. They say it is not worth their bench time. The small jobs are what keep the row alive, and the small jobs are what brought Avi to my stall. I did not know her name was Avi for a long time. She came the first time on a Tuesday, in the cold half of the year, with an older woman holding her hand. The older woman had the look you get after 30 years on a transit station. Careful eyes, hands kept in her coat, the way she stood half-turned so she could see both ends of the row without moving her head. The child was small. She had the pale lavender skin of the Severny line and the silver hair that runs faintly luminous in low light, and large eyes a little wider apart than a human child's. Her ears came to a soft point under her hair. She wore a gray coat too large for her and brown boots with the fastenings out of order. She said in trade tongue, "It won't sing." She held out a toy. It was a soft plush mech, a little knight no taller than my hand, with a velvet body the color of an evening sky and a small windmill flower stitched to the top of its head, where the helmet plume would have been. The eyes were button eyes. One of them was hanging from a single thread. The velvet on its belly had been restitched many times, the seams clumsy and tight in some places, fine and small in others, the work of a dozen different hands across a great many years. The little arms hung limp. There was the suggestion of a wind-up key in the back, half hidden by velvet. I took the toy. I felt the weight of it, heavier than a plush should be. There was something inside, a small wound mechanism. I looked at the child. I looked at the older woman. The older woman did not speak. She kept her eyes on the row. "What does it do when it sings?" I asked. The child looked at her boots. "It plays a tune," she said. My mother taught it to me. But it stopped. Your mother taught you the tune. Yes. I have learned. On the third row at Sunvel, not to ask the next question. Sunvel is full of children whose mothers taught them tunes that have since stopped. So I only nodded, and I turned the toy in my hands. What do you have to pay? I asked. The child looked up at the older woman. The older woman gave a small nod. The child fished in her coat pocket and brought out a single brass chip. It was the standard chip, the kind you get out of a public exchange machine for putting in a half credit. She set it on the front bench between us. That's all, I asked, that's all. I looked at the toy again. I looked at Mira, who had stopped pretending to do her lessons and was watching me from the corner. Keep it, I said. I pushed the brass chip back across the bench. Bring it to me tomorrow. I'll see what's inside. The child took the chip back without ceremony. She did not thank me. She put her hand back in the older woman's hand, and they went away down the row. When they were out of earshot, Mira said, "She didn't say thank you." "No," I said. "She didn't have to." "Why not?" "She didn't pay yet." Mira thought about this. "Are we going to fix it for one chip?" "We're going to fix it because it's broken." She did not argue. She rolled up her slate and turned the page in her primer and went on with her sums. Child came back the next day. She did not say anything. She stood on the other side of the front bench and waited. Was elbow deep in a feed pump that had been brought in by a freight runner with a deadline, and I told her, without lifting my head, that the toy had not been opened yet and to come back tomorrow. She nodded and waited a minute longer in case I changed my mind, and then she put her hand in the older woman's hand and they went away. She came back the day after that. The older woman waited at the corner of the row this time where she could see the stall but not be inside it. Child set her elbows on the bench and watched me work on a kettle whose element had gone. Told her again that the toy had not been opened yet. There was a queue. There always was a queue. And she nodded, slow, and stood there another 5 minutes before going back to the older woman. On the third day I closed the stall an hour early. I told Mira to stay out front and keep an eye on the row, and I took the plush toy from the wrapped shelf and I sat down at the back bench with my hand lamp and a clean rag. I opened it carefully. The velvet was old enough that you could feel the fibers thinning under your thumb. The seam down its belly had a long, thin run of glue along one side, where a hasty hand had tried to hold it closed in the past, and dark stains where the glue had bled through. I cut the thread along the better stitched side, never the glue side. You ruin the cloth. And I peeled the velvet back. There was a small wooden frame inside, no bigger than the palm of my hand. The wood was a dark, close-grained kind I did not recognize, polished smooth at the edges by long handling. Set in the frame was a music box mechanism. Brass drum, brass comb, a single mainspring, a wind-up key fitted through a velvet sleeve and out the back of the toy. The drum had small raised pins set in its surface, the tune. The comb was a fan of brass teeth above the drum, each tooth tuned by length to a note. It was an old design. I had seen drawings of music boxes like it in a hand-bound book my grandfather kept on a shelf at home, and I had once taken apart a cheap modern copy that came in on a trade-in. But I had never put my hands on the real thing. Teeth of the comb were oxidized faintly at the bases. The mainspring was sound. The drum looked sound. I turned the key by hand and watched the drum try to rotate. It did not rotate. It moved a quarter turn and stopped. Something inside the gear train was binding. I worked the velvet back further and lifted the wooden frame out by its edges. The gear train was on the underside. A small chain of brass gears that translated the slow, steady unwind of the mainspring into the steady rotation of the drum. There were 4 gears. The smallest one, near the drum, was missing a tooth. The empty slot showed bright, fresh metal, recently broken, at least newly exposed. The remaining teeth on either side of the gap had bent slightly inward. When the mainspring tried to drive the train, the bent teeth caught the next gear in the chain and stopped everything cold. I sat for a long time looking at it. There are people on the inner row who would have refused the job at this point. The right thing, by the book, is to hand the toy back and say it needs a master horologist and a stocked drawer of period parts. The book is right. But there was a child at the corner who came back 3 days running, and a brass chip that had been pushed across my bench twice, and a music box drum with a Queen's pattern stamp on its underside. Yes, I knew the stamp. Every mechanic on Sunvel knew the stamp, even if we did not know which queen. And I did not have it in me to send her away. I went to the salvage drawer and I took out the metronome. The metronome had come in a year before, in a trade-in box with a load of broken kitchen scales. The customer had been moving off station and wanted the box to be worth the price of a bottle of pressed liquor and a coat for her son. I had taken the box, paid her the price of 2 bottles, and not opened it until the next slow afternoon. Most of what was in it had gone for parts. The metronome had no use I could see, a tabletop pendulum on a wooden base, the kind a music teacher would set, ticking next to a piano. And I had put it on the high shelf at the back of the stall and forgotten about it. The base of the metronome held a small gear train. The smallest gear was the same diameter as the broken gear in the toy. The tooth count was wrong. 15 where I needed 12. But the blank stock was the right thickness, and the metal was the right kind. I could file 3 teeth off, recut the spacing, and have a gear that would fit. It took me most of the evening. Clamped the gear in the bench vise with a strip of cloth so the jaws would not bite, and I worked the file slowly. First the rough file, then the fine. Taking off 1 tooth at a time, then recutting the new ridges between to keep the spacing even. Mira watched for a while from the doorway of the back room and then came to sit on the stool beside me. She knows enough not to crowd a man at a vise. "Does the toy do?" she asked. "It sings." "Like a music box?" "It is a music box, with a plush on the outside." She thought about this. "Is the song nice?" "I don't know yet. We'll find out tomorrow." "Can I help?" I gave her the fine file and showed her the angle. She held it the way I had taught her to hold a file. Wrist relaxed, the cut on the push stroke, the lift on the back stroke. And she worked one of the ridges for me while I tested the next. She is not bad with a file. She is going to be better than I am, if she wants the trade. By the time the bench lamp had warmed to its evening color, the new gear sat in the train. Without binding, I dabbed a single drop of fine oil on each bearing surface, set the mainspring, and turned the key once. The drum rotated. Pins lifted the teeth of the comb in their order, and the comb sounded, 4 soft notes, then a pause, then a melody that began climbing, a slow tune, a child's tune, the kind of thing you would sing to a baby in the dark. It went for a few bars, and then the spring ran down and the room was quiet again. Mira said, "Oh." I said, "Yes." I worked another hour on the velvet. Torn seam needed glue and stitches both. Glue first, pressed under a wooden block while it set, then a careful running stitch in a thread I matched, as best I could from my drawer of thread spools. The button eye needed reattaching. I drilled a fresh hole through the back of the button with a hand pin, threaded it doubled, knotted it inside the head where the knot would not show. The other button eye I left alone. It was loose, but it was holding. When I was done, I held the toy under the lamp and looked at it. It was a small worn toy, neatly mended. You could tell it was old. You could not tell it had been opened. I set it on the back bench, under the oilcloth, and I closed up the stall, and I took Mira home for supper. The child came back the next morning. She was alone this time. The older woman was at the corner again, hands in her coat. The child came up to the bench and put her hands on the edge of it and looked at me. I went to the back bench and brought out the toy. I set it on the front bench between us. She looked at it for a moment without picking it up. "I had to take the velvet off the belly to fix it," I said. "I tried to put it back the way I found it. You can tell on the inside, but not on the outside, unless you know what you're looking for." She nodded. "Try the key," I said. She picked the toy up in both small hands. She turned the key slowly, the way you turn a key that is not turned in a long time. The mainspring took the wind. I heard the soft click of it engaging. She set the toy on the bench and let go. The drum turned. The notes came out. 4 soft notes, the pause, the climb. She began to sing along with it. She sang very softly, in a language I did not know. The vowels were Sevreni, I think. The syllables ran differently than the trade tongue I had heard her speak. The notes she sang matched the comb. She knew every note. She knew where the breaths went between the lines. She closed her eyes when she sang, and she did not open them until the spring ran down and the last note faded. Then she opened her eyes and she looked at me, and she did not say thank you, and she did not need to. The older woman had come to the corner of the stall while the music was playing. She was standing very still. I had not seen her come. 2 other people had stopped at the row. A stocky Sevreni laborer with a tool belt, who was looking at the child with his mouth slightly open, and a thin Calthian clerk with a clipboard, who had paused mid-stride and was now turning very slowly away, the way a man turns when he means to leave a place quickly without seeming to leave it. I did not understand any of it then. I knew only that something had happened that was not about the toy. The child wound the key again. The music played again. She did not sing this time. She watched the drum turn. When the music ran down, she said, "Thank you." She set the brass chip on the bench. I pushed it back. "It was a good job," I said. "You don't owe me for a good job." She looked at me a moment longer. Then she took the chip back and she took the toy. And she went to the older woman, and they went away down the row. They did not hurry. They walked the way they had always walked. The older woman half turned to watch both ends of the row, the child's small hand in hers. After they had gone, I looked at the corner where the Calthian clerk had been. He was no longer there. The next morning at first light there were 3 of them at my stall. They were in the deep gray livery of the Sovrani Royal Watch. I had not seen the livery in life. I had seen it in pictures in the news feeds, slow cycle pieces about the old royal house, the one that had fallen 2 centuries ago, and the deep gray had not been on the new feeds in a long time. The 3 were a sergeant and 2 younger officers. The sergeant had a tablet in her hand and an expression on her face that I did not like. She said, "Master Pell, we require a moment of your time." "You have it," I said. "On the 20th of this month a child brought a personal effect to your stall for repair. You completed the repair on the 23rd and returned the effect to the child the following morning. We require you to produce all records of the transaction." I did not say anything for a moment. I looked at Mira, who was on her stool in the corner with her slate, and who had gone very still. "It's all right," I said to Mira. "Stay where you are." I went to the back of the stall and got my work log. I keep a paper log because the customers on the 3rd row do not always have an exchange account that will take a digital receipt, and the paper log lets me write whatever they want me to write, including nothing. I opened it to the page for the 20th. The entry read, "Plush toy, missing gear, no fee." I turned the log around so the sergeant could read it. She read it. She read it again. "You did not record the customer." "No." "You did not record any identifying mark on the object." "No." "You returned an unidentified personal effect to an unidentified customer without record, after performing an unrecorded repair." "Yes." She looked at me for a long moment. "Master Pell," she said, "the object you repaired is Sovrani royal property of the highest order. It has been the subject of a standing search order for 191 years. You will accompany us to the customs annex." I said, "My daughter." The sergeant looked at Mira. Her expression did not change much, but it changed enough. "Your daughter may remain at the stall, under the care of a neighbor of your choosing, while we conduct the inquiry. We do not detain children of suspects." "Suspects of what?" "Theft and unlawful possession of Class 1 Royal Heritage property." I had not been called a suspect before. I had been called a few other things, on the 3rd row, but not a suspect. I closed the work log. I looked at Mira. "I'm going with these people for a little while," I said. "Next door to Ishan's stall." "Stay there, I'll come back," Mira said. "When?" "As soon as I can." She did not cry. She climbed off her stool, picked up her slate and her primer, and walked next door to Ishan's tea stall without looking back at me. The sergeant of the Royal Watch watched her go. The 2 younger officers did not move. When Mira was inside Ishan's stall, the sergeant said, "This way, Master Pell." They did not put restraints on me. They walked one on each side of me, down the 3rd row, the sergeant ahead, and we passed the kettle mender, and the rope coil shop, and the lamp oil cellar, and the little place that sells dried fruit in paper twists, and every one of them was watching, because 3 uniforms walking a man off the 3rd row at Sunville is a thing that happens once in a long while and is remembered. The customs annex sits at the end of the 3rd row, where the row meets the inner ring. It is a low building of corrugated steel, painted the dull cream that all the Sundvel administration is painted. They took me through the main office, past 2 clerks who did not look up, and into a holding room with a bare table and 3 chairs and a single lamp set into the ceiling. They sat me at the table. The sergeant set the tea in front of her, and the 2 officers stood against the wall. She asked me the same questions over again. She asked me when the child first came. She asked me what the child looked like. She asked me what the older woman looked like. She asked me what the toy looked like before I opened it, and what it looked like after. She asked me what was inside. She asked me what gear I had used to replace the broken one, and where I had got it from, and how I had filed it. She asked me what I had paid for the metronome, and from whom and on what date. I told her everything. I told her plainly. I did not embellish, and I did not leave anything out. I told her about the brass chip and pushing it back, and about Mira on the stool, and about working the file in the evening, and about the music when the spring took, and about the child's voice singing along. When I told her about the child singing, the Sanchart stopped writing on the tablet for a moment. She did not look up. She wrote again. She left the room. The two officers stayed against the wall. They did not say anything. She came back 20 minutes later with a small steel box in her hands. She set the box on the table. She opened the box. Inside, on a folded cloth, was the toy, she said. "Look at this and tell me if this is what you repaired," I said. "Yes." She closed the box. She left the room again. The two officers stayed against the wall. I sat at the table and looked at my hands. My hands were not clean. They had grease on them from the morning's work. The bay door motor I had been planning to finish after breakfast. I had not had breakfast. I had not had time to wash my hands. The sergeant came back once more before the regent arrived. She came in alone this time, with no tablet, and she sat down across from me, and she did not start writing. She looked at me for a moment. She said, "Master Pell, I have one more question. It is not for the record." "Sir," I said, "you told me the song. Hum the first 4 notes for me. I am not a singer. I have never been one. But I had heard the song twice now. Once in the evening when the spring took, and once in the morning when the child had wounded on the front bench. And 4 notes is not many notes. I hummed the first 4 notes as I had heard them on the comb." She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she said, "Thank you, Master Pell. You wanted to know if I was lying." "I wanted to know," she said, "whether the song was what we thought it was. I was a child once on a station, where my grandmother taught me the lullabies the old queens were said to have written. She taught me 4 of them. The one you just hummed was the 3rd. I did not know any human ear had heard it." She stood up, she said, "The regent will be here within the hour. He has come from very far. I do not envy you the next conversation, but I will say that I have served him for 19 years, and you do not need to be afraid of it." She closed the door behind her quietly. I sat for a long time. I thought about Mira. I thought about the work log on my bench and the wrapped feed pump in the queue and the kettle whose customer was coming back this afternoon. I thought about the brass chip on my front bench and the child's voice singing in a tongue I did not know, and the Calthian clerk who had turned away from the row. I did not know what they thought I had done. I knew what I had done was open a velvet seam and file 3 teeth off a salvaged gear and put a music box back into a worn plush so that a small child could hear her mother's song again. I thought it was a strange thing to be called a suspect for. In the late afternoon, the door opened, and the Crown Regent of the Sovereignty walked into the room. I did not know it was the Crown Regent at first. I knew only that he was old, and that he wore robes of the same deep gray as the royal watch, but with a long band of silver thread across the chest, and that the 2 officers against the wall did not so much as breathe when he came in, and that the sergeant who came behind him put the steel box down on the table and then stepped out of the room and closed the door so quietly behind her that I did not hear the latch. The regent stood for a moment by the door, looking at me. His face was a long pale lavender, deeply at the eyes and at the mouth. His silver hair was bound back in a single plait. He was very tall and very thin. He carried no weapon and he had no escort in the room. He said, in trade tongue, "Master Pell." "Sir," I said, "my name is Marithvar. I am the Crown Regent of the Sovereignty in exile." I did not know what to say to that. I said, "Sir." He came to the table and sat down across from me. He folded his hands. He looked at me for a long time before he spoke again. He did not look angry, or sad, or any of the things I might have expected. He looked the way a man looks when he has been searching for one thing for a great many years, and the thing has been found in a place he had not thought to look, and he is still adjusting to the fact. He said, "I would like to tell you a story. It will not take long. Then I will ask you a question, may I?" I said, "Yes, sir." He opened the steel box. He set the toy on the table between us. The way you set down a thing that is precious to you, so the other person can see why. He said, 193 years ago, by the human out, my sister was crowned the 81st sovereign of the Sevreni. The succession was contested. The Chaldean houses were rising in the inner sectors, and our line had been weakening for a generation. My sister knew she had perhaps 6 years on the throne, perhaps fewer. She used them to make a child. He looked at the toy. She made the child quietly, with a man we trusted. The pregnancy was hidden. When the daughter was born, my sister did not declare her heir. She kept her hidden in the deep wing of the palace. And she taught her, for the years she had with her, the things she wanted her daughter to know. One of the things was a song. My sister was a composer. She wrote a song for her daughter in the months before the daughter was born. A small song, 4 bars and then a climb, a thing to sing in the dark. She had it set into a music box mechanism, and she sewed the mechanism into a plush toy that the child would carry. She wanted her daughter to have her mother's voice with her, wherever she went. He touched the velvet of the toy once, very lightly, and drew his hand back. The Chaldean houses moved against us in the 7th year of my sister's reign. The palace was taken in a single night. My sister was killed at the foot of the Great Stair. The daughter, 18 months old, at the time, was carried out a service door by her nursemaid. The nursemaid had no protection and no plan beyond getting the child off the world. She got her to a freighter, and the freighter took her to a station 2 systems away. The nursemaid raised the child as her own. When the nursemaid grew too old to care for the child, by then grown, chose a successor from among the nursemaid's people, and the child gave the toy to the successor along with the song. The successor raised a child in her turn, and that child grew and chose a successor, and gave her the toy and the song. 7 generations, Master Pell, 7 nursemaids. The line has been a line of nursemaids for 191 years, because to declare the heir, at any point in that century and a half, would have brought the Chaldean houses down on her. And because the heir herself, in every generation, has chosen safety over her name. He looked at me. The toy stopped working in the 4th generation. The gear snapped. The small gear, the one near the drum. None of the nursemaids dared take it to a horologist. The horologists of the inner sectors know the Sevreni Queen's pattern stamp. They kept the toy. They handed it down with the song. The song was carried by the voice alone. The child who came to your stall is the 7th heir. Current nursemaid is the woman who waited at the corner of your row. The heir is 6 years old. Her chosen name is Avi. Her sovereign name, if she lives to claim it, will be Aviel the 7th. He stopped. I did not say anything. I had not been asked anything yet, he said. I have been searching for the heir for the whole of my adult life. I am the last of the Queen's near family. The Chaldean houses do not know I have continued the search. They believe the line ended in the 2nd generation. I have spent 31 years tracing the nursemaid's trail across 112 stations and outposts. I have found burial markers in 9 of them. I have followed false leads in every other. I came to Sunvel on a tip from a Chaldean clerk, a man who passed your stall yesterday morning, who heard a tune he should not have heard, and who reported it through the wrong channel before he understood what he had heard. I came as quickly as I could, came also to ensure that the royal watch reached you before any Chaldean agent did. He looked at his hands. They were old hands, long and thin, rings on 2 fingers, he said. Master Pell, I have one question for you. I would ask you to answer it plainly. Sir, how did you fix it? I told him about the velvet seam and the Queen's pattern stamp I had not asked about, and about the snapped gear and the bent teeth, and about the metronome on the high shelf at the back of the stall, and about the file work in the evening with Mira on the stool beside me. I told him about the drop of fine oil. I told him about the glue under the wooden block and the running stitch in the matched thread. I told him about the button I drilled through with a hand pin. I told him about how the drum had moved a quarter turn and stopped, and how it had moved through once the gear was true. He listened the whole way through. When I had finished, he sat for a moment longer, with his hands folded. He said, "The master horologists of the Chaldean houses have copies of the Queen's pattern. They have built reproductions. They have never been able to make a reproduction sing. They have always assumed the drum was the problem, or the comb, or the spring. Never thought it might be a 15-tooth gear from a tabletop metronome filed down to 12. He looked at me. He said, "Did any of them think to ask the child what the toy was supposed to do?" I did not know what to say to that. I said, "She told me it sang." "Yes," he said, "she did." He sat for a long time. He said, "I would like to offer you a position, not in payment. No payment for what you have done. The position is this. The heir's nursemaid is old. She has done her work, and she has done it well, but she is tired. And the heir is now of an age where she should begin learning the craft of her hands, as well as the song of her line. There is no one in our court who could teach her what you teach your daughter on the stool by your bench. I have watched the Rose records from the morning. I saw the small file in the small hand. I would like the heir to learn what your daughter is learning. I would like you to be the heir's first master in the trade. There would be a household for you on the seat world, schooling for your daughter at the Royal Academy, a salary at the rank of master horologist. Your wife would have a posting at any port she chose. You would not be a courtier. You would be a master, with a stall of your own and a workshop, and a small alien girl on a stool beside you." He waited. I sat for a long time. I thought about Mira on the stool beside me. I thought about my wife on her long haul. 6 months out, 3 home, and the letters in the drawer at the back of the stall. I thought about Esha next door at the tea stall, and the kettle mender on the other side, and the rope coil man who comes round on first day with bread from his cousin's oven, and the customers know my hand and bring their hand warmers and their lamp batteries and the click-back ducks of their grandchildren. I thought about the brass chip on the front bench. I thought about the child's voice, singing in a tongue I did not know. I said, "Sir." He waited. Said, "I am grateful. I am more grateful than I have words to say. But I cannot come." He did not move. He waited for the rest. I said, "My daughter is in school here. My wife comes home to this address. The third row is what we have, and we have it because we have made it ours. And if we leave it now, we will not have made it ours. We will have used it until something better came along. I would not be able to teach the heir anything if I came to your court as that kind of man. I would not be the man you saw on the work log. I would be a man who had been given a household." I stopped. I did not know how to say the rest. He said very quietly, "Go on, Master Pell." I said, "If the heir would like to come and sit on Mira's stool sometimes, when the court will spare her, she is welcome. I will teach her what I teach Mira. I will not charge her, because I do not charge children for sitting on a stool. I will not stop running the stall, because the stall is what I am. She can come. She can stay an afternoon or a week, or as long as your protocols allow. I will keep a stool for her." He sat very still. He said, "That is a better offer than mine." He took something from the inside of his robe. It was a small disc, no larger than a brass chip, in the same deep gray as his robes, with the silver band across the face of it. He set it on the table between us. He said, "This is the regent's seal. There are 7 of them in existence. This is the 8th. If you ever need anything from the sovereignty court, anywhere in our reach, present this, and you will have it. If your daughter is ever in trouble, present this. If your wife is ever in trouble, present this. It is not a payment. It is the keeping of a debt." I picked it up. It was warmer than it should have been. I do not know what it was made of. He stood up. He said, "I will ask the Royal Watch to apologize formally for the manner of your detention. They were acting on standing orders. They did not know the standing order had been answered. They will not trouble you again." He went to the door. He stopped at the door. He turned back. He said, "Master Pell, the song my sister wrote, did it sound the way you thought a song for a child should sound?" I thought about it. I said, "Yes, sir. It sounded like a song a mother would write." He looked at me for a moment longer. Then he opened the door and went out of the room. The sergeant came back 10 minutes later. She did not apologize then. The apology came later in writing, on official paper, with the seal of the Royal Watch in blue ink at the top. She walked me back to my stall. She did not walk in front this time. She walked beside me. The 2 officers were not with us. The row was watching as we passed. And it was watching differently now than it had watched in the morning. Some of them already knew. Bird moves fast on the 3rd row. Ishan came out of the tea stall with Mira when she saw us. Mira ran the last few steps. I picked her up. She was heavier than I remembered, and lighter. The way your child always is in the moment you have not held them long enough. It's all right, I said. I'm back. They took you a long time. I know, I'm sorry. Was it the toy? It was the toy. It was a good toy. It was older than I knew. She looked at me. Did you get in trouble for fixing it? No, I said. I did not get in trouble for fixing it. I got in trouble for not asking about it. Next time I'll ask. She thought about this. You said you don't ask. That's true, I don't ask usually. So next time you still won't ask. I smiled. She is sharper than I am sometimes. I will not ask, I said. I will keep the work log a little better. I took her home for supper. That evening, after Mira was asleep, there was a knock on the back of the stall. I opened the door. The older woman was there. Avi was beside her. They had a small bundle in a cloth bag. Shh. We came to say goodbye for now, the older woman said. Her trade tongue was better than I had thought. It had been better the whole time. She had only chosen not to use it. We leave on the Regent's tender at first light. Court is bringing the heir back to the seat world for her training, I said. I am glad you came. Avi looked up at me. She held out the bundle. I took it. It was light. I opened it. Inside was a small wooden box, no bigger than the palm of my hand. Inside the box was a clipping of soft velvet. A squat from a corner of the toy's body, no larger than my thumbnail. A tiny silver thread stitch in one edge. She said, I had to cut a little when we sewed it up properly at the court. Thought you should have a piece. Since you put it back together, I said, thank you. I closed the box. I knelt down so my face was level with hers. I said, the stool is here. When you come back, the stool is here. There is no schedule. You come when you can. She nodded. She had the seriousness of a child who has carried a song for 6 years, she said. I will bring my own file. Bring it, I said. I will sharpen it. The older woman put her hand on the child's shoulder, and they went away into the dark of the row. Closed the back door. I sat at my bench for a long time without doing anything. The seasons passed. Mira learned her sums and started in on her geometry. My wife came home on her 3-month rotation and stayed 3 months and went out again on the long haul. I fixed kettles and hand warmers and bicycle bells and the small mechanisms in children's toys, and I kept a stool clean at my bench, the one Mira had used when she was smaller, in case it was needed. A letter came after the first turning of the long year. It was a paper letter, brought by a private courier in deep gray livery who set it on my bench and did not wait for a response. It was written in a child's careful hand, trade tongue, with a few words in Sevreni that I did not know. It said, Master Pell, I am learning to file. My nursemaid as well. Would like to come for my name day next season. I will bring my file. Avi. I wrote back the same day. I wrote, Avi, the stool is here. Bring the file. A. Pell. She came on her name day. She has come on her name day every year since. She sits on the stool beside Mira when Mira is between lessons and she works the small jobs. The bicycle bells, the wind-up clocks, the click-back ducks. She is not bad with a file. She is going to be better than I am, if they let her keep the trade. There has been some trouble around the question of whether they will let her keep the trade. The court has had to settle it more than once. There are counselors who believe an heir should not be sitting on a stool filing teeth into a brass gear at a backwater outpost. There are counselors who believe she should be learning the deep protocols and the languages and the histories of her line and nothing else, and that the file work is a kindness the regent has indulged that has gone on too long. The regent has so far overruled them every time. I am told he has said, in the rooms where these things are said, that the queen who wrote the song would have wanted her daughter to know how to file a gear, because the queen herself had hands and used them, and a sovereign whose hands have never made anything is a sovereign who will be ruled by the people who have. I cannot say if he is right about that. I only know that Avi comes every name day, and the stool is here. She brought me a sharpening stone last year, a real one, from the workshops of the seat world, polished smooth, with the heir's mark etched faintly into the underside where you cannot see it, unless you tilt to the lamp. She said it was for my file. I have not used it on my file. I have used it on hers. The toy I never saw again. I did not need to. I had heard the song once, and a man does not need to hear a song like that more than once to keep it. The regent's seal sits in the drawer at the back of the stall, in among the letters from my wife. I have not had occasion to use it. I do not expect I will. It is not the kind of thing you use. It is the kind of thing you keep. The way the nursemaids kept the toy, quietly, in plain sight. In case a child ever needs to hear her mother's voice in the dark, the only thing standing between her and the song is a man at a back bench with a salvaged metronome on the high shelf and an empty stool waiting for her by his side.